Are African American women being targeted on the continent of Africa? Well, yes. Now targeted for what? You may want to know. And in this video, I'm going to get into that. I'm seeing the comments, I'm seeing the stories. I'm well aware that there is a narrative about West Africa that is being shared with the entire world, attempting to discourage Black American, African American women from traveling, migrating to the continent of Africa. And so in this video, I want to share my authentic experience as an African American woman who has migrated from the US to the continent of Africa and currently living in my second African country of South Africa. Welcome to the channel if you're new. My name is Ashley. On my channel, Ashley in Africa, I share my journey of living, moving, and doing business on the continent of Africa. I'm also the founder and creator of the Africa Investors Academy, which is a global community of entrepreneurs, investors, and aspiring entrepreneurs and investors who have a desire to build location-independent businesses so that they can migrate and do business on the continent of Africa. Essentially, I help you get your money right prior to moving to the continent so that you have a consistent flow of income and can translate that income and that skill set to build a business for the growth of Africa. So if this content sounds interesting to you, please be sure to like this video and share it with someone who would find value in it as well. So let's get into this. I covered, I think last week, on whether or not the continent is safe for African Americans. And my answer there is absolutely yes. But the truth is, women as a whole, currently where we are in this day and age, in this society, seem to be vulnerable and at risk for a lot of things that are happening in various societies, right? Not just Black women, not just women of color, but women of all experiences, walks, races, and religions. And this is counteractive to the divine role that women play, and the fact that we are seeing a spiritual global shift in the dominance and the I'd say like the remembering or the spiritual ascension of women. That's an entirely new video. However, I want to speak specifically on if African American women are targeted when they come to the continent. And so a little bit of backstory. I, at a six-figure income earner, mother of two, living in Atlanta, somewhat the American dream, decided to leave that life behind to pursue a better life on the continent of Africa. I migrated with my family, and we moved to Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The reason why I chose Tanzania, was at the time I valued the leadership. I was in alignment with the leadership of that country. The late, great President, Dr. John Pombe Magufuli, was in power at the time. And Tanzania was also one of the fastest growing economies on the continent and also in the world. It was a beautiful country filled with various landscapes, natural resources, in East Africa, which is somewhat known as the breadbasket of the continent of Africa. I had everything that I needed at the time to nourish my spirit, my body, and my family. And I lived in Tanzania for over 2 years and I loved it. But I also knew that there was something more in the long scheme of what I wanted for my life, which included a more prosperous global business, as well as, an aligned intellectual and cultural experience and essentially family. I wanted a more global experienced intellectual partner. And I knew that for me, Tanzania wasn't exactly the place for that. So why do I say that? Well, look at me, right? I clearly stand out in places where people predominantly have darker skin. Essentially, I didn't feel like I stood out, but I stood out. I knew that I stood out. My hair was different, my complexion was different, and obviously my accent was different. Did I feel targeted in Tanzania? I did. I felt targeted, and most people would call me Mzungu. I think the men would hear my accent, they would hear how I talked, and they would automatically assume, she's from the West, she got a little money, how can we do what we do? And this is not something that I was unfamiliar with. Quite frankly, I feel like I was targeted by male suitors in the US, right? But I had a level of awareness around what mattered to me, what was important to me. I was not going to fraternize with people that didn't necessarily meet my intellectual, emotional, financial, spiritual expectations, right? And that may sound harsh, that may sound arrogant, but essentially this was a layer of protection that fed into the level of discernment that is needed when migrating into a new country, into a new culture. Okay, so the truth is, yes, I was absolutely looked at. I think many men would see me and think that, oh, I'm gonna hook up with her. And these were people that would transport us, or carpenters where I would buy furniture from, or, just even being out and about and meeting people socially, even though I met men of a very high caliber and also a very high influence in Tanzania. I also was aware of the culture, and I recognized what it would take for me to be essentially a part of that lifestyle, and the potential that religious implications and cultural implications would come into play that I didn't necessarily align with. Okay, so for example, I understood and I value different family structures, including polygamy, that is relevant in certain African societies, but I wasn't quite sure that it was for me. I also wasn't quite sure that I wanted to convert to an alternative religion in order to marry someone. And so those are some of the things that I would have had to adjust to, and it just wasn't right for me. But in many of those scenarios with the men that I met along the way, whether it was religious, whether it was financial, spiritual, intellectual, it just wasn't aligned. And so what I recommend now doing so as a single woman, I'd have to say yes, because everything that I had experienced in Tanzania was for my good. It was exactly what I needed when I needed it. And it got me into a position where I recognized that everything that I thought I knew about Africa as a continent was completely wrong. And there was so much more for me to discover. I eventually migrated and moved to the country of South Africa, where I currently live and have been living for over a year. And I'm grateful that I made those decisions. While I'm here, do I feel targeted by African men? Not necessarily, but I also recognize that I'm different. I look different. I sound different. My vibe is different. My energy is different. So am I targeted? Is a man looking at me and saying, I'm trying to figure out what's up with her? Absolutely. Why? Because I think it's also about the energy that I carry. Yes?
Jacob is very pink on his eyes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And yes, if he's wearing paint in his face, that's when we're going bye-bye.
We're not going bye-bye.
You just have him do it here?
Yes. Okay. Bye. So, yeah, I mean, are we being targeted? I think that we stand out, and depending on how you carry that level of responsibility, well, that's up to you. I advise many people when I have one-on-one calls and in our community at the Africa Investors Academy that as a Black woman, you have a level of privilege when you come to the continent of Africa, and South Africa specifically, because our culture as African Americans has been exported all over the world. People are curious about us. Now, the way that you carry that responsibility and that privilege is very critical, because it can benefit you, but it can also put you at a disadvantage. And so being seen as foreign or as different, use that to your advantage. Why not? But have a level of responsibility with that, and don't go crying wolf or claiming that people are working against you when something happens because you were not using your responsibility accordingly. Now, this does not translate to what happened, unfortunately, to the 7 Black women in the Gambia that lost their life. I share my deepest condolences with them, and no woman should ever feel unsafe. But the reality is that all over this world, Black women are under attack. Over 97,000 Black women went missing in America in 2022. The stats for 2023 have not been released yet. However, they are said to be incrementally higher than those of 2022. But Black women in America don't fear living there. Google that. I'll leave the links below. The point of this video is not to shame any victims or dismiss the fact that every human life is valuable. The purpose of this video is to provide a level of clarity so that Black women, you can make an informed decision that isn't rooted in fear. Yes, we stand out. Yes, we evoke a level of privilege in our vibe, in our energy, in the way in which we carry ourselves, in the way we speak. But if you use none of that for the advancement of yourself and your people, well, I don't know what to tell you. But I also know that there were women, these Gambian women, since I've done my research, many of them were working to unite the diaspora. And unfortunately, there are people that do not want to see us win everywhere. And in my opinion, the worst of the worst of the worst exists in the great country that I'm from, called the US of A. And while I do believe it's a great country, I definitely don't want to live there. So make informed decisions, move fearlessly, because essentially your life depends on it. And at the end of your life, do you want to see the video that God plays back to you of what you could have been, what you could have done, what you could have achieved? Or do you want to leap out on faith because you know that you are covered, you are protected, you are guided, and you are divinely moved, not moved or stuck in fear? I invite you. And you can hear from other women who have made the transition successfully, who have started businesses, who are now married, who are raising their children, have had children on the continent. Over 20 speakers are going to be sharing their stories at the Africa Investors Academy Virtual Summit. Half of them are from the diaspora that have lived on the continent of Africa and are thriving in Ghana, in Tanzania, in South Africa. So we'd love to have you. Click the link in the description, join us, and hear the words from the mouth of people that have done it. Black women who came to the continent single, who are no longer single, that are going to share their stories with you and give you tangible tools so that you can take them and turn your Africa vision into action. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next time, I'll see you soon.